7, right?
Yeah, so we're good. We're in great shape.
Okay, great.
We usually give everybody, So Sam's going to cue us up. I guess we are live. So welcome the community of Salt Lake City. I'm Mike Collins with Ray and Associates. I have a pleasure and privilege of representing the firm that your Board of Education has engaged to help facilitate and guide the selection of your next superintendent. The exciting part is that yesterday, today, and tomorrow, you're looking at the finalists that your board has carefully screened. And these 3 finalists are some of the finest educators in the country because you had applicants from everywhere. So it's a pleasure tonight to welcome Dr. Jared Bryant, an outstanding educator who has had very successful opportunities throughout at least the last 10 years in Houston. And you're gonna get to hear from him tonight. All I do is ask questions. The answers reside with Dr. Bryant, and we're not going to waste any time. So what's going to happen tonight is Dr. Bryant, in about 1 minute, is going to introduce himself and spend a little time with you, talking about who he is, where he came from, why he's here now, and most importantly, what he sees as next steps in your future, along with his career. And then from that point, we will ask questions which you, the community, have submitted. We have tried to collect all those questions so that I hope you all agree, but the questions that we're asking are at least representative of the topics as well as the innuendos of the questions that you offered, because we can't ask everybody's because we need to conclude on time. So we're trying to be as representative as possible. And most importantly, we're trying to be as transparent about expressing questions around the subjects that you all expressed your concern. So without further ado, Dr. Bryant, it's a pleasure to welcome you once again. You've had a long day, but this is the most fun time of all.
Yeah.
So the floor is yours, sir.
All right. Well, thank you and good evening, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here in Salt Lake City. As was mentioned, I was born and raised in Texas, and I've been in Houston specifically for the past 10 years. And I'm so excited to be here and talk a little bit about myself and why I'm ready to be the next superintendent of Salt Lake City Schools. So just a little bit of background that may or may not be in the bio that you read, but I started out my career as a high school math teacher through a program called Teach for America. And, I was one of those lost college kids that knew I had a passion for education and public service, but I wasn't really sure how. I thought teaching could be that route. And I loved my kiddos, and I loved, interacting with so many bright, brilliant minds. Those kids have since graduated from college and they're out in the world now. It's been a minute. And I love getting to meet a variety of educators and people who help me kind of figure out, what's next for me. I certainly could have taught for longer than I did, but I was very blessed to have met someone who had a huge influence in my life. And he was starting a new innovative program specifically for low-income students in Houston. And his vision, he's a big idea guy, was to find our high-achieving low-income students in Houston and to give them the same resources that a lot of our very affluent students in Houston get. So, if you have means in the city of Houston or, any big city, you're probably taking elite test prep programs for the SAT. You're probably getting one-on-one advising from a private counselor. You're probably taking all sorts of different classes to make your resume look good, also that you can be competitive for highly selective colleges and universities. So the idea was we would give those same services and resources to some of our highest needs students that had the potential academically. So we launched it. And after I taught, I spent the next 5 years building that program from the ground up. And essentially, within 3 years, we were operating at 42 high schools and serving hundreds of students in the Houston area. The program was successful at getting students to date to over 160 selective colleges and universities. And these kids are doing great. They're graduating at rates of above 90%, which we're very proud of, because if you look at the data nationwide, too many of our even very talented low-income students, they don't graduate. So our kids are graduating from college at 90+%. Most kids in that same boat who are not in a program like this, below 50%. In fact, there are some universities out there that a lot of kids that I worked with in Houston go to, and their graduation rates for their college are in the single digits. And it's those types of experiences that I had launching this program that really changed my trajectory. So I became a fierce advocate for college and career advising. So I managed to raise millions of dollars to make this program available to all 42 HISD high school campuses. And today we serve thousands of students, and we've since spun off into a separate nonprofit organization that serves 5 districts in Houston. We'll probably be launching nationally soon. So it's great the work is expanding. But I kept on thinking about what's my educational journey. After launching this successful program, that's great. But what about all these other kids that need a college counselor too? So I spent the next several years as Houston ISD's assistant superintendent over a post-secondary initiative. So I was tasked with raising money and finding resources to put college counselors in all the schools. I was very proud of that. And we saw beautiful things happen in Houston. So for the first time, thousands more students were applying for financial aid than ever before. More students were enrolling in college, and we were starting to see an uptick in the number of students passing advanced placement exams, in the IB exams. So in my current role today, at a high level, what I do is I work in our strategy and innovation office. So essentially, it's an office that consists of a wide variety of different things, but they're really departments and initiatives that are high priority for our superintendent and board. And what we really want to focus on in Houston is preparing our students to be college, career, and military ready. We're actually rated on that in Houston on an A through F scale, every school, every district. So I've really honed in on how do you give students more access to more rigorous coursework, to access to passing their dual credit and AP classes. I support a portfolio of 30 international baccalaureate authorized schools. We have an IB program here in Salt Lake, and we have 20 in the pipeline because we want to make sure that we have IB programs across all quadrants of the city. So anybody, no matter what their zip code, has access to that right in their backyard, and they don't have to travel across town. So I'm really proud of that. And I know I'm going on, I'm kind of a chatterbox, but I did also want to share for a moment, why Salt Lake, before I answer some of the questions you all have for me today. I'm really excited to be here. I've spent a lot of time working under phenomenal leaders and developing my own leadership as an executive for a large district. And I think I'm ready to take it to the next level in a district specifically like Salt Lake. When I think about our district, I see a lot of potential, and I want to go to a place where I can make a positive impact. And when I think about Salt Lake, I think about the changing demographics at the school level and district-wide. We're seeing that our populations are changing. But we're also a district that is subject to, essentially open enrollment across schools, across districts. So we're going to be in a position a couple of years from now where our enrollment might look a little bit smaller than it has been in the past. And I see a lot of potential there because instead of cutting programs, this is an opportunity for a new superintendent to come in and make Salt Lake the premier school district in the Utah area. So that means that perhaps if I live in Granite or another adjacent community, I'm going to really be looking at these innovative things that Salt Lake is doing and considering having my kids attend school there. There's a vibrant business community and a lot of folks that are working downtown that could easily drop off their students to a variety of different campuses that we have in the district. And that's something that I want to support because I want to grow our enrollment. I want to have the premier programs that make everybody really excited. And I've spent the last 8 years consistently implementing innovative programs that have really made a difference for kids. That's my passion. I've done it in districts that are bigger than Salt Lake and have even greater numbers of economically disadvantaged students. So I have full confidence that I could be a very effective superintendent of schools for your district. So with that said, I am jazzed to hear all the questions and answer them to the best of my ability so you can learn more about me.
Thanks, Dr. Bryant. I neglected, so I apologize. Translator, Nate Salazar, are you good or do we need to make some changes as we get into the questions?
We're good.
We're good? Thanks, Sam. That's all I need to know. I just wanted to double check. Nate Salazar is our translator. And when another life also happens to be your vice president of your school board, but So this is fabulous. This type of engagement is fabulous. Okay, Dr. Bryan, here we go. Trust has been tested this year across many areas, as you know, as every educator knows, because of the circumstances of the last year. How do you go about rebuilding trust with your stakeholders?
Right. That's my number one priority, because I think what I've heard loud and clear from the community today here in Salt Lake is that we really value our autonomy and our ability to make decisions collectively as a body. I've heard that from teachers. I've heard that from administrators. And I'm sure, and I'm hearing this from questions being asked by members of the community. So when I hear questions like this, it makes me wonder, where are the gaps and what is going to be my role moving forward in rebuilding that trust that we all deserve? And I think a big piece of that is really taking stakeholder engagement to the next level. I'm really excited to come to Salt Lake for another reason that I've shared earlier today, but I think this district is the perfect size both to innovate and to push me as a leader to be out there in the community. I think part of building trust is building relationships, not just with my administrative team, not even just with campus principals, but really members of the community. We have a lot of really incredible parents and stakeholders in this city who have a stake in making sure that our schools are effective. So I want to listen to you. I'm new to Utah. I get that. And this would be my first and hopefully last superintendency that I'll have. So I know that I have a lot of learning that I have to do. And before any decisions are made, I want to take stakeholder engagement very seriously. And I want to have an open door policy and structures for the community to give me input on my decision making. Because, once we do that, I think we can have genuine dialogues. As a community, that there are going to be decisions that are made by either a city council or a superintendent or whomever that some agree with and some don't. I know I won't have 100% consensus on everything that I put forward, but what I want to push myself to do is to ensure that when I do push an idea forward, that it's the result of very thorough stakeholder engagement, because I don't want you to be blindsided by something I'm putting out there on a board agenda or something you heard, at a news conference. I think the big decisions that I want to make and the big innovations that I would want to put forward would be somewhat of a joint dialogue between groups. So we're not surprised and we feel like I can trust my district to include me in the decision making in the way that makes the most sense. I think that's key. It takes a lot of time, especially for a new guy who doesn't have a relationship with Salt Lake City. But I know that's what I need to do to make change happen.
Thank you. Okay, number 2. How will you show the kids and the children of the district that you are here for them?
I want them to know who I am. And I think that this is the district where I can actually do that. I think it's possible for any district, but again, my background is working in a system with almost as many schools and days in the year. And, what I loved about that and why I did that for so long and could do it, another 8 years is because you see impact across a wide scale very quickly. But I think what can get lost in the wash is the ability to be out there and present in our schools. I had the privilege of talking to some fantastic student leaders, for example, this afternoon, that really pushed my thinking on, how to adjust even my own priorities. I'm hearing a lot of concerns about mental health and desire for anti-racist curriculum and for inclusive schools that are safe environments to learn. And I take that to heart. And that's something that, I think is going to impact my decision-making in a lot of ways. And there's no way around it other than I need to be in front of students, engaging with either our student leaders or going to campuses and going to baseball games and going to football games and going to, these different events that are meaningful. I went to one middle school campus today that, plans to do the High School musical. That's really exciting. Like, I want to support the arts like this because I want to raise the profile of these types of things, because we have really talented students that are engaged in a variety of activities that are going to take them so far. And I want to actually be there and living it. And we have some young kiddos in the district, and I want to meet them now. And I hope that, I can see them grow and evolve over the course of their elementary, middle, and high school careers. And I can adjust my own plans accordingly based on the relationships that I've built with our student leaders, and for our students in our classrooms. I'm super excited to have that more than I've ever had that before.
Thank you. Okay. Your third question. School is often considered a safety net, allowing for counseling, food, additional supports, straight up childcare. And this has been thrown into sharp, relief by the COVID crisis. How would you plan to maintain these safety nets in or when another crisis occurs?
Yeah, we have to be 3 steps ahead of the game. And
Yeah.
I know this because I worked in Houston ISD, where we have huge homeless populations, students with special needs, students who are food insecure or home insecure. And I think that COVID only exacerbated and made larger things that we should have been paying attention to already. And these aren't things that just because we have vaccines that we can just put that on the back burner. I don't think that those things should ever be on the back burner, because I know urban education. I know that we can't just operate as though, class and effective schooling is what happens in the classroom. I think you have to invest resources in different ways, especially for our students that need a lot of extra support for those reasons that I described. So we need to double down on our efforts on counseling and social work, and access to what they call in the business wraparound services, but basically making sure that we know who the providers are of different resources, and me as superintendent being strategic in these partnerships. We only have so many staff members, but I would venture to say that I think this happens to be a community, especially on the nonprofit sector side, that wants to help the students in our schools. I think we just need a superintendent who comes from a background like me, where we're constantly thinking about ways that we can work with the community to make these things happen for students. It may evolve over time, but for me, I don't want to ever forget that students need these mental support systems and other systems, because I truly believe that when students come to school feeling safe, feeling that they can be themselves, that they're not hungry, that they have a place to go where they're around incredible teachers that care about them, and opportunities outside of school to participate in sports and all sorts of things that help them de-stress. We can't forget about those things. And in fact, we need to learn how to enhance them, and to really take a critical look at how our students can benefit from some of these services that we had during a crisis, even if we're not in a crisis. And let's say, God forbid, something were to happen again in the future, that will also be prepared more so than ever before, because these problems are not going to evaporate overnight.
Thank you, Dr. Bryant. What does your ideal urban school district look like?
Sure. I really, I think an urban school district is the one that's serving all of its students to the best of its ability. It's one that's nimble. It's one that's willing to adapt and innovate. I think if you put the same inputs in, your best case scenario is you'll get the same outputs out. But I think what COVID made us realize is that even if you do have, a decent, stable way of doing things, that a disruption like a pandemic or a crisis can really mess everything up. And everybody now has to, start from scratch and roll their sleeves up and figure out how to innovate and learn. So I think a model school district is one that changes how it does things, with the assistance of data over the course of years. So I think about a place like Houston, where we were trying to always be ahead of the ball. So we were fortunate to have incredible leadership who mentored me when I started about 8 years ago, who had a vision for a one-to-one laptop initiative before it was a cool thing. Like, this was a superintendent that realized, there's something here when it comes to blended learning. I don't know what it is, but I want to make sure that all of our kids have access to a laptop in an urban school district where, a lot of kids realistically don't have access to a stable laptop or even internet. So we've been doing this for years. And what was great about us trying to be ahead of the trends, which we thought was going to be more towards virtual and blended learning ended up being a huge benefit because while we didn't do things perfectly, we were able to pivot for our high school students a little quicker than other districts did across the nation who didn't even have what they call a content management system. So the place where you put the online lessons and engage with kids. We figured that out because we were being ahead of the ball. And as superintendent, this is something that I take very seriously because you deserve to have someone who's always thinking 3 steps ahead. I don't just want to be the superintendent that sits at my desk and waits for, a bill to be passed and then I react to it with an angry tweet or whatever it is. Like, I want to be the superintendent that is actively engaging and lobbying for things on behalf of our district. So at least I understand what's probably coming down around the corner and I can be proactive. And like I mentioned with Salt Lake City specifically, the enrollment numbers do concern me. And I think that going 3-4 years down the line, we could be in a place where we're serving less students, which means that we have fewer resources, which means that we're going to have to make programmatic changes. So that's why I want to be the person that goes in from day one. It works with stakeholders to create a strategic plan and implements programs that's really going to make Salt Lake City the premier urban school district. I want us to be the district across Utah and perhaps even across the state where when we launch an innovative initiative that addresses the needs of our students of color or addresses equity gaps for our students or implements a curriculum on anti-racism, the other districts look to us and they give us a call. They give me a call, our board members a call, parents a call to figure out, what is Salt Lake doing? And I want to do something like that too. I've been part of the trendsetter trend in Houston, and that's something I'm passionate about. And it takes a lot of spotlighting and a lot of careful listening and a lot of using data to figure out what works and scales it so that it meets the needs of all of our learners, which includes quite a few students that need extra supports. So I think an urban school system is one that's nimble and willing to be ahead of the times to make sure that none of our students fall behind because we don't have the time for them to fall behind.
Thank you very much. During the pandemic, there are many students that have been given computers. Some of them have struggles because of connectivity, et cetera. But what is your plan for continued digital literacy and computer access that makes it meaningful for them in a classroom and at home doing homework?
Right. And I think that goes back to what I'm saying, where I think certain things aren't going to go back completely to what, 2019 was. I think that we've learned that, obviously a lot of us don't want to be learning digitally. We would prefer to operate in person. But I think the interesting thing is that we've realized that some students thrive in online environments and some teachers actually thrive as virtual teachers. Like, they provide, very engaging content and stuff that helps students learn. So why can't we learn from that and double down resources and training on how to be even better than that? If we see pockets of greatness based on the things that we did just out of necessity, then let's bring it with us into our, year 2022 way and approach to learning. And of course, digital literacy is very important, both for staff and for students, because, especially with the role of social media playing on, the ways that we get information, the way that the internet takes a role in giving us access to information and even connections to other students and staff members across the district, we need to make sure that we're proactive in making sure students have the skills, both on like an elementary level. Back in my day, we had like typing classes. I think that's like step one, but I think we need to take it to the next level and make sure that students know how to find and curate information that's going to help them be successful. And then thinking about what digital ways that we could scale some of the best professional development out there to make it accessible for all of our teachers so that they're the best of their craft. And the same goes for student and for staff as well. So I'm very passionate about that, but I always am a believer in that, as fluent as we can be in the digital literacy, we always have to keep our teachers in mind and our staff in mind, because they need to be trained and they need to be comfortable to use this to help elevate their instruction to the next level. These types of things are never meant to replace learning. They're really meant to enhance the experience and to provide more access, even to scale hard to staff teaching subjects. We could have online versions of that, for example, to give more students across more schools access to specific courses that, we wouldn't be able to offer otherwise. I mean, there's a really interesting economy of scale But I would say what I'm thinking of, at least right now in the short term, is, who was really great at the virtual teaching out of curiosity? Because I think certain aspects of that, I'd be curious in moving forward, just because you can impact students across school lines, which is really exciting for me because I look a lot at the data and I know that there are certain courses that can either help remediate students' gaps, that provide access to teachers that teach a certain way or engage in the right way, really speak to the student. And then again, teaching courses that would be hard to scale in a traditional school setting, but it's very doable to do in a digital format. I think some kids and teachers would love that.
Okay. Please describe your experience with implementation of restorative practices for low-level and high-level discipline issues.
Sure. So that's something where, I need to make sure that I'm knowing the best practices out there in urban education and schools across the country. So this would be a learning opportunity for me that hasn't been precisely within my wheelhouse as it relates to supporting programming implementation and as it relates to college and career readiness and some of the other initiatives that I'm working on right now. But I think that's so important. And I think, I can learn the technical nuances to specific frameworks when the time is right. Hopefully if I get this job. But I think what you need to know right now is that I'm somebody that really wants to err on the side of being restorative and not punitive, especially when when we're talking about, what schools students should be attending. I don't think that we should be sending every student that messes up to an alternative environment. I think that we need to really treat our children as humans that, make errors sometimes, and it's on us to really help them understand how they can improve upon themselves. So restorative practices. So one of the trends that I've been hearing a lot, around issues of tension between either students or staff members where they feel that an environment is hostile. Like students are, acting a certain way because perhaps they're fearful or perhaps they're angry about something. And I think that we need to really listen to those moments very carefully and to understand where students are coming from and connecting them with the proper supports that escalate. So, multi-tiers of intervention for sure. But because I truly believe that, you can't just throw a technical Band-Aid on a problem that's probably more deeply rooted in something that requires greater levels of escalation. So I'm all about that and restoring a student, giving them an opportunity to make themselves better. I think all of us on this call want to make ourselves better, but we need the right tools. And I think we as the adults in the room need to make sure that we're giving the students the tools to succeed. So that's just my broad philosophy on something that can get very technical.
Thank you, Dr. Bryant. Please describe your experience in coordinating with local law enforcement and/or school resource officers.
Sure. So that's another area where that would be new to me in the role of superintendent of schools, as that would be the first time that I would directly oversee that relationship with law enforcement. But that said, a really interesting experience that I had was back in February of so almost exactly a year ago, because we were having a lot of conversations amongst the community for how to approach law enforcement and restorative officer protocols in the district. Because believe it or not, I mean, just about a year ago in Houston ISD, we had a very tragic school shooting that made students really question how safe they felt in school. And we took it upon ourselves as leaders to really get a lot of stakeholders involved. So we talked to senior leadership. And one of the areas that I happen to be responsible for is our relationship with our student Congress. So our representatives that represent every high school in the district and basically serve in a formal advisory capacity to senior leaders like myself and our superintendent. And that was such a great exercise and a good practice that we need to do even more often. And if our superintendent really institutionalized that, if it's not there already, I know we have a student representative on the board, but really thinking about how can I hear even more voices across different grade levels and campuses. I think it's important because what those students taught me is that the way that administrators and community members viewed making school safe was different than the way that students saw safe and effective schools running. It was fascinating, and that's because at the end of the day, we all see the world in different ways. And it's only when you actually engage the stakeholders, including the cops and other professionals involved in the situation, you can really get at the root of what some of our concerns are and act accordingly. These are not simple cut and dry problems. These are ones that require thorough thought and due diligence. And that experience taught me that that's an area where I need to do my due diligence and talk to the stakeholders so that I can refine what our strategy as a district will be to ensure that schools are safe and that students feel like they're in a very safe learning environment.
Thank you. Just as a time check, you have 8 questions left and you have about 20 minutes just to kind of give you some math. Dr. Bryant, as the majority of Salt Lake City School District students and families are of various races, nationalities, socioeconomic backgrounds, describe a time when you became aware of any biases. Second part of that question is, how have you made adjustments according to that recognition?
Yeah. So I have a lot of experience with this because I implement a lot of programs that are directly in the campuses. So a couple that would be that innovative program that works with high achieving students who are low income, gets them into college, and then also our international baccalaureate program. So those two things came kind of head to head when I started thinking about how we can optimize our post-secondary readiness programming at schools. And there's one school that comes to mind that is large. It's a large comprehensive high school, serves thousands of students and has, elite programming that, is very well respected by the community. And then if you look at the data on the aggregate, the school's doing very well. I think there are fine teachers there. I think that the school's doing a great job, but it's more about, thinking about how we can add resources to serve even more students. Because if you scratch beneath the surface, what you found is that, yes, on paper, students are going to excellent universities, and the students who graduate from their IB and AP programs are doing fantastically. But then, what I always push, different school leaders and my colleagues to think about is how can we make that more accessible to more students? Because when you really look at the data, it was sometimes our most underserved students that were not taking advantage of these types of programs. And that really hits my heart because I think that we're missing the point if we have this amazing program and for whatever reason, certain demographic groups just aren't participating. So we had to dig a little deeper and we had to make adjustments to admissions policies into specific programs and think about ways that we could make programming more inclusive for all students. Think about ways that we can create pipeline programs because we do understand that certain programs are more rigorous, but maybe that means we need to do better work in between the time between middle school and high school or during the 8th grade year to get students ready to hit the ground running once they get into a really rigorous program. So I had to have some difficult conversations where, for example, I wanted to expand that college access program at the school. And interestingly enough, some people were very divided on that. Some people felt that we don't need to really do that there at the school. Like they're fine. Their kids are fine. They have fantastic counselors, which they did. And they have a college going culture, which they do. However, what I found was that a lot of our specifically minority students and economically disadvantaged students were not going to the colleges that they should have. They were very bright, but they were what we call undermatching. So that means they were going to more open enrollment colleges or not going to college at all because they weren't being pushed into taking AP classes, even if they had the aptitude based on, other metrics that we use. So we really needed to push a paradigm shift there because what we found is that with programming like that program I mentioned, we were able to provide additional resources that were not an extra burden to the school. They were a supplement to the school. And from there, we saw that way more students were going to these highly selective colleges than ever before. And it's not because, we invented incredible candidates to college out of thin air. It's because they were there. They just need an extra push. When we're talking about issues of equity and students of color, and race and class and privilege, sometimes you need to give certain groups an extra nudge so they can reach their potential. So if anything, you can consider me kind of like the nudger in chief because I understand equity gaps. I understand high minority and high socioeconomic populations. And I know when we need to have the difficult conversations to make things more inclusive so more students can thrive. So for example, in Salt Lake, I want to expand the number of students getting IB diplomas. I think that we're doing a fantastic job, but I think there's opportunity for more. And that's just one of many examples of things that I think that I could leave a very positive mark for more students in Salt Lake.
Thank you. Take a breath, take a sip.
Oh, sorry, I forgot my time. Yeah. Oh,
No, you're doing fine. You're doing fine. I just want you to take a breath, take a sip. Okay. How will the superintendent ensure equitable access and inclusion for students with disabilities? Please refer to the components of the inclusion resolution passed last spring, if possible.
I wish I could review that document. I didn't know in advance, but I would love to.
That's fine.
All in all, I just want to convey that, I'm all for access for all students and opportunities. That's at the forefront of my mind. Our special populations are at the front of my mind. GT students, special education students, homeless students, all these students, they really need extra support systems to thrive, which means they need the services to thrive. And we can do this in a lot of different ways. We can, innovate with larger hub programs where we have very specialized services for special education, in a fewer number of schools, but the robust amount of service you can get would be greater than if you just spread everything equally across all of the schools. There are all sorts of strategic conversations that we have, and I know there are a lot of questions I want to get to, but I want to say that's at the forefront of my mind, and I've done all sorts of things when it comes to getting more special education students in advanced placement, for example. I realized that a lot of students weren't taking the SAT who were special education, and that's just because a lot of even parents and staff didn't realize that, for the SAT, even you can get accommodations, you can get extended time, you could have a dictionary, you could have the text become larger. There are ways that we can accommodate a lot of different special education needs for an assessment that could really change your life by opening opportunities and doors. So that's just one of many ways that I'd approach this.
Thank you. Next question. We've had a problem with declining enrollment in the district for many years before COVID-19. What are examples of school closures or reconfigurations in your district? And how would you engage the community in positively with this contentious task ahead?
Yeah. It's hard to close schools, and typically in my experience that usually only happens under very severe circumstances because the political will to close a school is rarely going to be there. Usually something extraordinary has to happen that usually comes from the state level. And to be honest with you, closing schools is not at the forefront of my mind because I don't think that we've done everything that we can to ensure that our enrollment can go on the up and up. I think that we need to understand what's the landscape, not just within Salt Lake City, the district, but across the city. What do parents want? I think that we heard a message loud and clear when a lot of parents switched schools this year because they wanted an in-person option. We happen to not have an in-person option here in Salt Lake City, and they kind of spoke with their feet, and we weren't ready quite yet, but it's very exciting that we're ready to figure this out because we're going to have the tools to make sure that our staff feels safe and that our teachers feel safe. So that's great. And now I want to look even beyond COVID and think about what are some innovative programming that we can implement in the schools to make Salt Lake City the premier place for students or for parents to think about when they're sending kids to school. I don't think we're at the closure conversation yet. I don't think we've exhausted the options. I want to make sure that we grow our populations, but also being mindful, because it sounds like you and I are on the same page here. We know that the trends don't look good, and we know that's going to impact our ability to operate at the way that we can. So I do want to plan for that. I do want to have those hard conversations where if we do continue to see drops, we need to have difficult conversations as to how we're going to provide an educational experience that also keeps us financially solvent. But I also want to plan for this very, real possibility that we could turn ourselves around and really bring more students back into the district than we've had in a long time.
Thank you, Dr. Bryant. Along that same line, we have another question. It's got a question, a comment, and a question, and I think it's worthy of kind of the combination, and then I'll break it down as you need. Please explain your plan for effective school closures that will address the declining enrollment Salt Lake District is facing. And you might have touched on some of that. Then it says, please also identify what changes you will make to ensure that all graduates possess adequate skills to earn a living wage and build meaningful careers. And I'm going to keep the other one as a separate one because I think that's a mouthful. And we'll just make it another question.
Yeah, so I think I answered the first part. So it's not really on my radar right now to really initiate any big conversations around school closures because I think we still have some time, not a lot of time. We do need to plan for lower enrollment, but not to the extent to where we, close down schools. I think we really need to do a deep dive into what are families in the Salt Lake City area looking for, and how can we make sure that we're positioned as a district to do that. And I love that second follow-up question because that ties into exactly what I'm trying to say, which is that, a lot of folks come to high school and they realize that, maybe they don't want to go to college. And a lot of students do go to high school thinking that they want to go to college. And, what I bring to the table is, almost 8+ years thinking about what are ways to make innovative programming that makes Salt Lake City, in this example, enticing for families. So how we did this in Houston, we doubled down on the number of early college high schools, and we were ahead of the curve in that we didn't only have early college high schools that gave associate's degrees, but we also were among the first in the state really to implement an early college high school, but it's not academic in track, it's more workforce track. And that's very appealing to a very different subset of students because you can literally leave high school with a credential, whether that's a certificate or even an associate's degree in a profession that we thought ahead as a district that's going to link you to a well-paying career. I think things like that are very appealing to families that, already know, or students that already know that, I want to just make as much money as I can. And then I'll always have the option to go back to school if I want to. But this is what I want now. And, what's Salt Lake School District going to do to get me there? So I'm very much on board with thinking about all the different ways that we can offer not just the career and technical education programming, but also potentially more associate's degrees, really working with our community college to increase our dual credit and dual enrollment, because we're really giving students a head start. And then what I'm really excited about that I think is a huge opportunity for Salt Lake is really solidifying our partnerships with the workforce, with the business community too. I mean, think about the hospitals that we have here. Think about the booming technology sector that we're seeing, and even finance. And believe it or not, there are a lot of jobs in these sectors that don't necessarily require a 4-year or 2-year degree even. They're what they call upskill jobs. And they're very specific credentials that we can connect students with now that set them up to, get a decent paying job right out of high school if that's the route they want to go. I like that because I think that one, that's going to help draw back students and address the enrollment challenges. And then two, it's going to make learning more meaningful for students right now because it ties to this end goal that they've decided that may or may not be college.
Thank you, sir. Next question, which moves on from this subject. Please explain how you will effectively and efficiently integrate mental health services into all schools.
Mm-hmm. So we need to look at our staffing and our budget to make sure that if we're not providing sufficient mental health services, that we start doing it. And on top of that, I'm really excited to think about innovative ways that we can track what types of services are being used in the district. I did this a lot on the college counseling side, where we kind of figured out what are kids asking about during the college process and when are they asking it and how many touch points are students getting. There are tools actually out there that will help us do this. And the data is really important because we can really make sure that we customize our programming at the campus level. If there are certain trends that are, let's say pertain more to homelessness or more to, food insecurity at certain schools, and maybe another school, some of the issues are more, referrals to psychological services or that sort of thing. We can create partnerships that are really catered to the needs of the community, but then we'll also have a repertoire of different providers that are handy should any student from any school need access to these types of services. So in terms of the mental health supports and any sort of outside academic support, I'm all on board. And I understand that dollars are limited, but as I mentioned before, my philosophy is that we shouldn't have students who are hungry or food insecure or are scared to go to school in school, because that impacts their learning environment. So we need to do better at providing more resources to where we can go to school and we can just focus on the learning. And I'm a big person on the external partnerships too. I think that there's untapped opportunities with the university, that can help us on some fronts as it relates to this. And then also our nonprofit and community partners that I think want to help. But what I'm hearing from stakeholders is that sometimes it just takes a long time to work with Salt Lake City. And I get it. I come from a large organization. It takes time to build working relationships, but it's worth it. And that's a huge priority that I want to move forward, because our kids need that now if they're not getting it now.
In the next 5 to 8 minutes, I'm going to ask you to answer 3 questions. Okay. And they also give you a chance to stretch your legs for a minute. So, what do you see as the most efficient way to create an equitable education approach among our student population? And how would you help to implement this?
Yeah, so we need to take a deep dive into what program offerings that we have across the district and really think about, what does equity mean? So here's my kind of pet peeve, is that a lot of people throw out the term equity, but we're all using it in different ways. And sadly, some of us use it in a way to fulfill some sort of agenda. So I think one of the first things that I want to deep dive in is, what is the district's definition of equity? So a lot of us have been accustomed to thinking about equity as this really nice graphic that shows, 3 kids watching the baseball game, and you have a short kid that needs taller blocks to see the baseball game over a fence, and the tall kid maybe needs 1 block. He doesn't need 3. So I think that's a really interesting way to start the conversation. But I think the harder conversation as district leaders and community members that we need to decide is, what does looking at the baseball game mean for education? So seeing a game seems simplistic enough. Like, okay, I want to see the baseball game, have a good view, right? But I think when it comes to education, it's more nuanced. There are a lot of things that we can measure. Is it the number of students going to college? Is it the number of students who are reading on grade level? Is it the gap between our minority and non-minority students? And we need to decide what viewing the game means in a few succinct ways that we can measure throughout the year. And then if a school isn't meeting the bare minimum of allowing the kids to see the game, I'm not even talking giving them binoculars or popcorn to watch the game. I'm just saying see the game. Then we need to double down on resources to get them to where they need to be. So that's just a very simplistic way of what most districts call an equity audit, which is a very extensive process where we look at dollars in, dollars out, and the effectiveness of different programming, and seeing for whom does the programming most benefit as they relate to our board goals. So that's something where I'm a strategic thinker. I love looking at the details and thinking on a system level how we can do that. And as somebody who comes from a large urban school system where we do have different needs in different communities, I feel well equipped to have those tough conversations that will eventually result in the kids getting what they need, if not more, to both see the game and enjoy it.
Thank you, sir. 2 more. This one's a little internal, but as a parent of 2 Salt Lake City School District students, I'm concerned that small groups of parents appear to be able to influence board members, policymakers to override the voice of the majority. That's the preface. How will you balance all voices of, this is the question, how will you balance all voices of stakeholders while working with those more influential and powerful in the communities to provide an equitable setting for all families?
Mm-hmm. So that goes back to why I'm excited to come to Salt Lake, because at least from my vantage point, this is a much smaller system for me. So I feel much more empowered to have meetings with various community members, more so than I could, in a system that serves, nearly 250,000 kids. So I not only want to meet with the students and staff and parents, but I also want to meet with community members and proactively. And I want to ask the tough questions and get feedback that, sometimes I want to hear and sometimes I may not want to hear it, but it's going to make me better. I see this a lot in urban education from my seat too, where, we'll put an initiative forward and we'll get a lot of community pushback, and that community pushback will result in us killing the initiative. And, when they ask, why did you kill the initiative? What people will say is, well, the community was against it. Or, the people spoke and they didn't like that thing that you were trying to do. But then I always push people to say, well, which people said that? Who said that? How many people? What communities? And that's not to be disparaging to those who are, using their voice as citizens to improve the district. I want their voices in the conversation. But I also think about somebody who comes from a large city that serves different demographics. And I'll just put it out there that some groups can be louder than others sometimes. And I don't just want to, operate under, what the loud people are telling me. I mean, this even brings me back to when I was a teacher. You ask kids, like, how are you doing? And they'll nod and say, I'm doing well. But there are some kids, I was one of those kids myself where, I'm not going to say that I'm feeling concerned about something unless somebody asks me. If somebody builds a relationship and that trust with me and can share something that maybe they didn't feel comfortable sharing in a full group. So I think it's incumbent upon me to not just rely on board meetings to hear from the citizens, but to really have community meetings too. And if there are certain groups that I'm not reaching, how can I reach them better? Maybe they like online forums better. Maybe they like coffee with the superintendent at their school. Maybe they like evenings versus mornings. I really need to mix it up. I'm not going to get it right away, but I think I'm going to quickly learn what my group is in Salt Lake. So that way I'm proactively reaching out to the voices that aren't necessarily the loudest, because they need to have their voices heard too.
Thank you. Last one, and I'm combining two because they're right down the same alley. One is, what are your goals for the school district? But I think you can incorporate that in this response. What do you see as the top priorities for the Salt Lake School District, and how will you set about working on those? And about a 2-minute answer would be fabulous.
Sure. So in 2 minutes, essentially, I have my theories, right? I come from a background working for a certain school district, doing certain things. But my perspective is not the end all be all, even if I were lucky enough to be your superintendent. I think what I've heard loud and clear from the community is that I need to be out there and gathering stakeholder input so that I can make a strategic plan. So one of the first things that I'd want to do is not lay out what the priorities are per se, but to really engage in a thorough listening and learning tour where I'm hearing from students and families and parents and stakeholders and staff, and really figuring out what the trends are and then connecting those dots and to create those goals. And of course, one of the major roles of the board, aside from hiring the superintendent, is to set the goals and accountability for the superintendent. So I want to help them develop those goals. And then from there, we can talk about what the priorities are. I have my theories, I'm not new to this. Like, I do think the enrollment challenges that I brought up are something that I'm thinking about. I'm thinking about, staffing. I'm thinking about how we can increase access to, what some in the community might say are elite programs, but I don't think they're meant to be. I just think that it's a vestige of a different time. How can I expand access to more opportunity, and how can I, address those gaps? So we close that gap that's very, very glaring between minority students and non-minority students in the district. So the way that I tackle it will be informed by the community, but as an outsider looking in, I could see myself focusing my time on those three things.
Dr. Bryan, thank you very much. Great work. If you want any concluding remarks for about a minute would be great. And then we're going to thank, and I want to, before you do that, and you get a chance to thank them, I just want to say on behalf of the board, and particularly on behalf of our firm, fabulous questions from the parents. This is our best assimilation of a bucket of questions. Congratulations. And then Dr. Bryan, please finish.
Sure. I mean, I just want to briefly say thank you for your engagement in this process. I mean, this is part of what makes me so excited about the possibility of serving as your superintendent. Obviously there are great candidates out there, but I just feel like this is such a nexus of all these positive things. Engaged community members that are asking the tough questions, a board that really wants to do what's right for kids, and incredible staff, students, and parents that are also making sure that they're heard as well. These are great things that a superintendent wants to go into. And if I'm fortunate to be your superintendent, I want to give it my all, and I want to do what's right for kids, and to hopefully take Salt Lake City into a very thriving next chapter. So thank you for your time. Thank you for your consideration. I hope you got to learn a little bit more about me and who I am, so you can help contribute to this very important decision that you have to make. So good night, and be well.
Be well. Thank you, sir. Go stretch your legs. I just want to say one more thing to the parents in the audience. Please, when you checked in, something popped up, but also if you go to the school district website under the search component, please fill out the survey. It is your impressions of each of the candidates. You did it last night, you get to do it tonight, and you're going to do it tomorrow night for the third candidate. Those will all be tabulated in advance of your board's consideration as they make the final determination for who will be your next superintendent. This is a very serious part of your voice, just like the community meetings and the focus groups were before and selecting and building the profile. This is your input into your feelings about what the board should consider in their final deliberations. Thank you very much. Have a great evening, and everybody, and best of luck to your students, most importantly, to your children. And everybody be safe and be well. Thank you. We'll be back shortly for the parent, I'm sorry, for the